We'll now move into questions, and I think rather than go automatically with Mr. McGowan beginning, perhaps we can start with Mr. McCarthy, and then we'll go down the line there. So the first question asks the following. The city's general fund balance committed for emergency contingencies is established at $7.2 million. In your opinion, is this emergency reserve level too much, too little, or about right? If it is not about right, why? And what would you do about it?
Wow. You know, I don't have a good handle on what the city needs as far as a reserve. I know the reserve has been higher, and we had to draw down on that because of the failure of Measure E. But there's a lot of things to consider with the pension, with the budget. I'm kind of at a loss, so I'm going to defer to.
Okay, Ms. Peterson?
First of all, our reserves is actually at $9 million. It's 50% of our operating budget by policy. And this is something that we've actually directed to the FAC to do a study to see if there's too much money in our reserves and if we can use some of that money to pay down unfunded liabilities or put it in infrastructure. But as the FAC had already discussed, 50% may be the right amount for now. So since they're the experts, I would think that that's what they've already done their investigation. So I would say that I would agree with the 50% policy. So I don't think it's too little or too much.
Okay, Ms. Losey?
I get to put my city treasurer hat on a little bit. So the policy is 50% of the budget with a minimum of the 7.2 million. Just maybe clarify that. He was asking the question. So it's true, the Finance Committee has been looking at the proper reserve level. I am very conservative. So to me, a 50% reserve is the minimum number. And, you know, if it were up to me, we'd have a full year, we'd have 12 months reserve, but that's probably a dream down the line. My issue with this topic is that I think there's a little bit of testing by the city manager and city staff, and maybe a little bit on the current city council, wondering if we can't reduce that reserve level so maybe they can grab some money to do something else, and I would be opposed to that. We need to keep 50% is a minimum reserve, and we can't all of a sudden grab $1 or $2 million out of there and deflect it to something else. I would absolutely be opposed to that.
Mr. Camps?
I'm concerned that the size of our reserves are depleting. And as they continue to deplete, we have long-term pension liabilities that no one seems to want to refer to as debt. And those pension liabilities are reported over a year ago at $15 million. They're probably more like 17. So the reality is we may need even more reserves. Our FAC is putting together long-term budgets. We haven't had those. And in putting those budgets together and watching their meetings, they don't have room for infrastructure and for capital improvement before they hit a bottom line that's close to zero. So I'm concerned with our reserves. I'm concerned with the fact that they're being depleted. As to the actual amount of percentage of reserve, I think I would defer to them to actually hear the answers.
Okay, Ms. King?
The 7.2 million is a minimum threshold. We do have a policy of keeping 50% of our operating budget as a reserve, and our fund actually tends to exceed that level. We have asked the Financial Advisory Committee to help us engage in a reserve study to see if that's an appropriate amount. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends that a 2-month reserve is appropriate. I think that probably because of the topography of our city and other risks that our city might have that are unique to us, that somewhere between a 2 and a 6 month might be appropriate. And that would enable us to use perhaps a small amount of that reserve to pay down pension liability or for other infrastructure needs. But again, I wouldn't do that unless we had a full study that had confirmed that something below 50% is appropriate. And again, I don't think we would ever go as low as 20%. I think the 7.2 million is probably a good minimum threshold. The question is above that.
Okay, Mr. McGowan.
As a member of the Financial Advisory Committee, we have been studying it, and the 50% number today is approximately $9 million out of the 10 that was referred to earlier. We are still having a very difficult time having excess cash from our general fund in order to fund our infrastructure needs, the capital improvement fund, or have money available to pay down any of the accrued unfunded liabilities. We recently did an analysis. The FAC reviewed it in its last meeting. We've agreed to table the measure about any potential reduction from the 50% until we get further information and further studies done as to what our needs are in the future. We are very much concerned that taking it below 50% would put serious pressure on the community.